One day, Mrs. Kumar was out for a walk with her two children, and someone was passing by, and they said, "Mrs. Kumar, such cute children, how old are they?" She replied, "The engineer is 5 years old, and the doctor is 7. Not necessarily the best joke, but it makes a very important point. And the point is that until recently, growing up in this country meant that some of your life's most important decisions were taken for you by other people, by your parents, by teachers, by society, by community. Your choices were shaped by different people, by society. And you know, our society has always been very structured. In the ancient text, the Manu Smriti, the Lord Manu said that we shall live life in 4 stages. He called it the 4 ashramas. Initially, 0 to 24, which is most of you, you will sit at the feet of your Guruji, learn diligently, be good students at the Gurukul. After you finish that, for the next 24 years, you're a householder and you have kids and you raise a family. And then, after you're done with your domestic obligations, you can finally disappear into the forest where you begin to contemplate important existential questions like, who am I? Why was I born? What is the meaning of my life? What happens after I die? And finally, at the age of 72, you renounce everything, you sit in the forest, you contemplate existence until you die. That was the old India. But now we have a new India. And the new India is a young India. We are the youngest country in the world. Can you believe this? 65% of our country is under the age of 35. And our country is so young, when I say 35, half of you are like, that's old, dude. Right? That's how young this country is. But 35 is really young. Any other country that would be considered youth. And 65 to 70% of our country is under the age of 35, which means 700 million of you are coming of age in this time when everything is changing, when norms are changing, rights and wrongs are changing, everything is in flux. You know, the writer Thomas Friedman, who wrote the best-selling book, The World is Flat, he compared India to a champagne bottle, and he said, India is like a champagne bottle that has been shaken for the last 40 years, and now that it's being uncorked, you better get out of the way, he said. That is an understatement. That is a gross understatement. Let me be clear. Never before in the history of the world have so many people made such a rapid social change in such a short time. 700 million people trying to define what's right and wrong. Think about what's happened in the last 10 years. The end of socialism, the end of the joint family, a nuclear family, working mother and dad, rapid urbanization, big TVs, cable TV, MTV, internet, smartphones, heightened individual aspirations and ambitions. India is not a champagne bottle, Mr. Friedman. India is a mighty river that has been held in check for all these decades, all these centuries by these walls of social institutions. And now, these walls are cracking. They are coming down. And trust me, this power, this raging river threatens to overrun everything in its path. You can't get out of the way of this river. You are the river. And just like the river has to find its way to the ocean, you and I have to channel this new energy to create a meaningful and purposeful life by answering life's most essential questions. Why am I born? What am I here for? And ultimately, who am I? You know, any city you go to now in India, go to any city, and you know this, right? There's a lot of energy. Look at you guys. Creative energy, positive energy, a lot of glamour, a lot of glitz. It looks good. But listen carefully. Look closely, and you will see dark clouds, and you'll hear the ominous rumbling, a forewarning of the things to come. Look at the newspapers every day, and you see headlines like this. I just saw this a couple of days ago. Upset at being denied bike, person kills himself, a boy kills himself. We are killing ourselves more than any other young country in the world. Do you know that the second leading cause of death in someone your age is suicide? Why is this happening? On the one hand, we're living in an amazing time, a lot of opportunity, so much going on. And on the other hand, there's so much anguish and grief, because for every person who kills himself or herself, there are 1,000 more who are confused, who are wondering, what should I do with my life? Why am I not happier? Why am I feeling anguish? Now, the question is, why is this happening? And to answer that question, we must go back in time to look at history, and not Indian history, but French history, strangely enough. In the late 19th century in France, there were a lot of suicides apparently, and the French philosopher and sociologist Émile Durkheim, French people, please excuse my pronunciation if that's not right, but Émile Durkheim said, what is going on in France? Why are so many people killing themselves? And he had a theory. He had a theory that suicide is not a psychological problem, but a sociological problem. And he wrote this very important book about suicide, and in that he said that when societies go through rapid social transformation, when societies have a huge change in their economic fortunes, people become confused. People's aspirations multiply, envy, regret, pain multiplies, and people kill themselves, and people feel very upset. I'm suggesting that the same thing is beginning in India today. Because you see, we don't have our rigid social structures, and that's a good thing. But there was one redeeming quality about having a rigid social structure, and it was this, that if you asked any important existential question, society gave you the answer, right? Who should I get married? Mommy will tell you. What should you do with your life? Your dad would tell you. Who am I? Society would tell you. There was no room or time or anguish to explore yourself. Answers were easy. But today, we have to ask ourselves the questions, and we have to answer it correctly, because if we get the answer wrong, or we can't answer the question, then we suffer. On the other hand, if we answer this question authentically from our heart, who am I, then this is the first time in Indian history that we can truly be ourselves and create an amazing society. Now, you know, as a psychiatrist, I've been fascinated by this question about identity. Who are we? In my own life, I lived in different countries. As a psychiatrist, I worked in the West and now in India. And I thought maybe the West has the answer, you know, because after all, America celebrates individualism, right? But here's what I have to report to you after 10 years of working as a psychiatrist in the United States. They are a depressed country. 10% of America is clinically depressed. 1 in 10 Americans takes antidepressants. Despite having really no problems in terms of basic needs, despite having material needs met, despite the country celebrating and institutionalizing individualism and enshrining the ideals of individualism in their constitution, it hasn't worked out for them. So I wondered, have other Asian countries figured it out? Maybe Japan has figured it out. It's an industrial economy, westernized a little bit. And here's what I found. There is an epidemic of something that Japanese psychiatrists call hikikomori. Young Japanese people locking themselves up in their rooms and in their houses, not because they're depressed, not because they're anxious, but because they don't want to face society. Society has become too ambiguous, too difficult, and they'd just rather stay in their room, order pizza, and many of them actually became millionaires doing day trading and stockbroking and so on. They're not depressed. They've just checked out of society. So clearly that's not working either. So the question then is, what is the answer? How do we find this answer to this difficult question, who am I? First of all, I want to remind you that you and I are the only animal species that asks this question. Right? You guys have pets, dogs? It's a beautiful life as long as you take good care of your pet, because it has no questions. It's not asking who am I, it's just doing its thing, living in the moment. And you hear a lot of people telling you, live in the moment, live in the present moment, but it's not easy, and I'll tell you why. Because your brain is not designed to live in the moment. All of us don't have a unified brain, you know. We have at least 3 layers in our brains. The oldest part is about 250 million years old, evolutionarily speaking. Some people are like, I'm just 24. No. I mean, your brain, evolutionarily speaking, is 250 million years old, and that part of the brain does everything like respiration, blood pressure. You don't have to worry about it. But then there's another layer of your brain, which is a limbic system, which is about 150 million years old. And this is your emotional brain. This is where lust and anger and fear and all the primal emotions reside, in your limbic system. And then the newest part of our brain is a neocortex, which is about 50 million years old, and only our species has such a big neocortex. And the neocortex is what I'm using to speak to you, and you're using to listen to me But operating under the surface much more powerfully is your emotional brain, which hasn't changed for 150 million years. Because when you were not you again, ma'am, 250 million, your ancestors were there in the forest, right? And a saber-toothed tiger came to eat him up or her up, you can't do a cost-benefit analysis right there. You know what I mean? You have to run. You have to run. And you run because nature has given you that power from the limbic system. You get a signal, danger, run. That's it. No thinking. Our brains are designed for survival, and they're designed for survival in prehistory, not in the post-industrial economy that we live in. That's just a blip in society. That's what, 200 years? Nothing. But today what's happened is most of us, fortunately, are not in any physical danger. We're not going to be eaten up by tigers. We are not in war zones, fortunately. You would think that we'd feel safe, we'd feel secure, we'd feel good. I can tell you as a psychiatrist, no, that's not happening. It's not happening because your primitive brain now is reacting to every threat to your emotional self as if it is a threat to your physical self. And your emotional self, your identity, my identity has just become that much more complex with the complexity of our society. Today, if you think you're going to lose your marks or be thrown out of college, believe me, your limbic system is telling you you're going to die. If your girlfriend ditches you, you're like, oh my God, you know what I mean? Every little thing is now coming through your limbic system as if it is a threat. Because as an individual, your sense of self rests on so many transient, ephemeral, subtle things. So individualism doesn't help our brain, it doesn't help us. And you can see why. But that's not more. A few years ago, a researcher in the University of Northwestern University in the United States, Joan Chiao, set out to study something called the serotonin transporter gene, a variant of that's called the depression gene, okay? And here's what she found. She found that this depression gene is twice as common in India as compared to the United States. 70% of us, 7 out of 10 in this room, have this gene, and this gene predisposes you to depression and anxiety. When they did studies of people with this gene, they found that if you have the serotonin transporter gene variant, you're more sensitive to social disapproval, to frowning faces, to people disapproving of you. At some level, genetically, we are hardwired to collectivism. Now, you can imagine how toxic Western individualism is by looking at the map of depression. Even though the United States has half the rate of that depressive gene, their rates of depression in the early 2000s was double that of India. I just want you to imagine what will happen when we change from collectivism to individualism, but we can't change our gene. It's like our bodies. We can't eat a Western diet. It gives us cardiovascular disease. We cannot live the Western model of individualism, ladies and gentlemen, because it will drive us crazy. But here's the good news, okay? After having traumatized you with this news, here's the good news. The good news is that today represents a dramatic opportunity, a huge opportunity. I feel goosebumps when I think about this. Because look, the old identity is gone. Social structures are gone. You're in the gap now, where in a sense, it's sort of like you don't have an identity. There's nobody to tell you who you are. There's a tendency for human beings at this point to reach for the first identity that makes sense. Instead of your parents telling you, this time it'll be the media that will whisper things in your ear. Tell you, look good, make more money, get more power, get more and more and more money, more power, more self-esteem, until before you know it, everyone wants to be a billionaire so freaking bad, and before you know it, you are enslaved now, enslaved by this Western individualistic model, and this time, you don't even know that you are enslaved. UL from Breaking Bad, any Breaking Bad fans? There's something wrong with my talk when this gets the biggest round of applause. That's what I'm talking about. Popular culture, celebrating money, and before you know it, you are going to be enslaved, my friends, enslaved and trapped by the matrix. And this time, you may not even know that you're enslaved. This morning, I offer you the blue pill. And the blue pill simply is this, that only you have the answer to the question, who am I? And this is your time. You are going to define what is normal for India. People are going to look at you because you're 70% of the population. Our country is going to age. And when they age, you are the normative force. You're going to tell your children and your grandchildren, this is the way we live in India. You have a choice. You're at a crossroads. Either you can continue, you and I can continue to embrace the Western model of individualism, which quite clearly hasn't worked out and quite clearly will hurt us, or we can stop and say we're going to reject a purely Western model of individualism. We are going to reinterpret ancient wisdom, Indian ancient wisdom, with an awareness of what we need in today's world. Your country and the world needs you. It's vital. You're not going to just model this for India, I think for the world, because you're the world's youngest population. And what we need to do, I think, is look at our scriptures, and there's not enough time, of course, to get into everything, but some really wonderful, important points that come from our scriptures. If you look at that, when we move the slide, for example, is Maya. You know Maya. Maya means illusion. And the Vedas tell us that everything is an illusion. And as a psychiatrist, I can tell you that's kind of true. Which is to say that I'm real, you're real, I touch you, you can touch me. But this is just one perspective. Your version of reality, my version of reality is just one version of reality. It's a construct of your mind. So what Maya tells you is, take it easy. Not such a big deal, you know. Take whole life a little bit easier. Don't take life so seriously. At the same time, as Krishna told Arjuna, take your work seriously. Immerse yourself in your work, in your passion completely. Our scriptures also tell us that there is really no difference between you and I, between me and the world, between you and the universe. What you do affects everyone around you, and you and I cannot be happy, given our genetics, given our philosophy, given what we have seen. We cannot be happy until everyone is happy and content, or at least everyone is not suffering. And therefore, in this new individualism, we must think not only about ourselves, but we must think about how our work impacts everybody else. Finally, the word for health in Sanskrit is swasthya. You've heard of that, right? It's a very interesting word if you break it down. Swasthya. Swa, which means self. Sthya, which means place. So the ancient scriptures knew this a long time ago. What they were saying is, health means you reside in your heart. You're comfortable with the self. You stop fighting with yourself. Stop judging yourself. Accept yourself. When you do that, you will feel that acceptance to others. Comparison will fall, envy will go away. You will be connected with your passions, and you will start working for yourself and for the betterment of society. You are the river. You will find the ocean as long as you know this is your task and your time is now. You're here to have fun. You're here to make a difference. You're here to add value to the world and to others. So my message is simple. The time is now. You have broken free. Stay free. Break free. Be yourself and be happy. Thank you. Thank you.